And we're recording. Oh, hold on. I need to adjust the OBS here. Everything got shifted around. Okay, that should be
Okay.
adequate. That should be adequate. Welcome back, everybody, to another installation of Grimdark Therapy. Well, sort of an unofficial, reduced cast size of Grimdark Therapy.
It's 66% of Grimdark Therapy.
Yes, yes. Today I'm joined by, well, it's just me and Macca from the Outer Circle. His
Ahoy, hoy.
YouTube, Macca's channel, the Outer Circle, will be linked in the description of this video. And for today, we have a little bit of an impromptu topic. If I butcher the layout of it, Macca, feel free to correct. But essentially, it's what mechanics throughout the editions have caused a desire for a following edition. Is that the gist of it?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the gist of it. It's like if you just said it's a 3 yearly cycle, and no matter what happens, you're getting a new addition to the game, and everything you've bought for it, all of your codexes, all of your stuff becomes redundant, and it's a waste of your resources. People would be upset. People are willing to have new additions to games, but they need breathing room, right? You don't come out with second edition, a year after first edition, typically. Most game systems, I'd say probably 5 to 7 years, most game systems between their editions. There's no hard and fast rule, but with Warhammer, obviously, there's a point where people say, yes, I'm happy for a new edition, because I have some real issues with the current one, and I want a new edition, therefore, because I think it can undo or fix a lot of those issues. Whether or not that's successful is beside the point.
Yeah, I mean, that remains to be seen by what the edition sets out to do. It seems to be the case. It introduces some different problems and then shores up maybe a couple of the outlying ones, the more egregious issues, right? But I think it's a fairly... Like, we were talking a little bit about it before we got going, and I was making the connection that in the more recent editions, at least for 40K, and probably to Age of Sigmar as well, as far as I can discern, it seems to be the case that new editions are mainly the result of all the publications having gone through the motions and everyone's got a release, and now with all factions being released and accounted for, we gotta do the great reset, right? But that being said, you still need a lack, like a perceived improvement to look forward to, right? You need a glorious kind of sunrise over the hill to look forward to of that new edition, right? Like, things could be better. Like, that's the perception that you kind of need to have if you're going to launch a new edition, and it's because of the mechanics that we're sort of aiming to talk about today that would cause one to perceive a new edition in that way.
I think very much so. There are a lot of historical examples, and we'll give a few today because, we don't have any hard and fast answers, I'm afraid. It's more just sort of it's a vibe episode, I guess you can call it. But these things that have occurred, like, they don't just fall out of the sky. There are often reasons that if you go to a bunch of different players from different backgrounds, they'll probably all come to similar conclusions about what the issues are with an edition. So I guess I'll start with, like, the first example of this being 8th edition 40K, and what a breath of fresh air it was for 40K as a whole after 7th edition Warhammer 40,000. Because back at that time, they had very much been on just a constant trajectory of a very, very incremental evolution of essentially the same core game system since 3rd edition 40K. And 7th started just bastardizing the rule set by adding in, at the time, what we call formations, decurions, data slates, and detachments. These were a series of typically digital rules, products, whatever you want to say, that gave certain bonuses that just broke core fundamentals of the game, which at the time was you had a force organization chart, which said you could have, 6 troops, 3 elites, 3 heavy support, 3 fast attack, and 2 HQ. And this new thing came on that said, you can take this formation, you're allowed to take 1 per army. By the way, the formation could have, equivalent to 3 heavy support slots in it. So it's like, so hang on, you've fundamentally added 6 heavy support slots in this army. And there is no additional troops tax, for example, for taking this. And often these formations had some serious bonuses. The Space Marines famously had one, I think it was Skyhammer or something like that, where the entire detachment came down from the sky in drop pods, and all of your heavy support Marines, which normally had to stand still to fire their weapons, could move and fire them as normal, right? and it,
right.
Just very conveniently that this happened not long before Primaris Marines dropped, and they shipped a lot of Firstborn Tacticals and Devastators and drop pods. Or the Marines also had one which... Yeah, it's funny how it works. Marines also had one where it gave all of their units could take a free transport. So everyone was just taking free Razorbacks with twin plasma guns, las cannon. Yeah. So at 2,000 points, people could have... I think you could have over 1,000 points of free vehicles if you tooled them up.
Yeah, what
it was insane.
Go figure what that does to the balance of power in one list versus another. Unless the idea is everyone has to use these busted detachments, right? But
again, these detachments did have the side effect. Depends how conspiratorial you want to be, but they'd have the side effect of moving a lot of old kits.
Interesting.
But the Skyhammer one, for example, used the Assault Marines kit, a kit that was last updated probably 3rd or 4th edition. So, yeah, take that how you will.
The shoe fits.
But those core mechanics meant that, people had a general bad taste in their mouth that said, when 8th edition came on, they went, yeah, I think I would rather 8th edition than sticking with 7th.
Yes, yeah. I mean, that was definitely the vibe in the local gaming store, that's for sure. There was such good energy in the honeymoon period of 8th edition. It was just indexes, and it was just a simple gaming system. All the factions were more or less on a pretty even playing field.
Exactly right.
Yeah, so an egregious one that comes to mind for me, if we're talking mechanics in general, and I actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I believe you positioned it initially as just mechanics that broke the edition's fundamentals that made a new edition desirable. I think that's sort of how it was initially framed, because and it naturally falls in line with game mechanics that I would kind of hate or dislike. And, the miracle dice and fate dice and Tzeentch magic dice, anytime you have dice swapping, I feel it becomes very problematic in a dice-based game. It becomes a bit... I don't know how you feel about it, Macca, but it feels a bit rules for me, not for thee, when the core rules are... one player is at the receiving end of probability, much more negatively affected by it than the player that I can switch this to whatever I need to in the moment.
Yeah, it's very frustrating if you're the player who you are doing everything right to, we'll say, play the game, win the game, have a chance at winning the game. But when you feel like that's been taken away from you due to mechanics or in the list construction process, I mean, there's always going to be people out there who will say, oh, who cares? You know that these rules are... that these rules or mechanics are out there, so build around it. But it's that's not the point. You shouldn't be having to build around it. It's supposed to be fun.
Oh, yeah, I'm totally on the same page with you, and I would like to even add to that. It's not even just building around the mechanics. Especially now, when in 40K at least, when points updates are more proliferous than they've ever been, and as these strong armies, like Eldar is the example Eldar Ancestors of Battle in 10th edition, were swapping dice, and they became, they would receive points nerfs or points increases to compensate for this disproportional advantage. It's like, well, now my whole army is much more expensive, and so I can't just play around it. I actually have to play into it because all my stuff is paying for it. So it's kind of like a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. Like I fundamentally don't like I like Sisters of Battle. I fundamentally don't like dice swapping as a mechanic. I think in minor cases here or there you have a relic or something that lets you do it once per battle, or just for this character's weapons or something. I think that's fine, right? But when it's a widespread system, I think it leads to the abuse we've seen with like the infamous Eldar at the start of 10th edition's launch, just using dice swapping to trigger all sorts of universal weapon abilities that are just like clearly not intended. It was just an oversight that was just never like, it feels as though the due diligence was never done, and then the player base just has to well, you either reap the rewards or suffer the might if you're on the receiving end of all those Eldar fate dice devastating wound weapons. I know we're not talking about 40k, or sorry, about current meta 40k, but that is something that I was happy to see go away for the Eldar.
Yeah, well, Eldar's a great one. So back in the what would it have been? It would have been 6th edition. Back in 6th edition, when they redid the Elder Codex, the Wave Serpent, the transport vehicle, had the Serpent's Shield. It was a protective aura around the tank, and not a very great protective aura. But you could elect to discard this, where use it as a shooting weapon in place of it. Now, the discarding this didn't mean that your tank was suddenly weak. It just meant it just dropped down to the base stats of any other tank in the game. So, okay, it's Eldar, so it's not exactly heavily armored, but still, it's transport tanks like Armor 12, like whatever, it's fine. It's going to take at least a lot of missile launches to take it down. It's not exactly weak. But the shooting attack they gave it in place of the Serpent Shield was 60 inches or 72 inches of range. It was something like strength 6 and ignored cover saves and was pinning. So at the time, it was just brutal. People would bring these. They were cheap, quote unquote. I'm doing the quotation marks with my fingers in the air. It was a cheap transport vehicle, and instead this thing had more firepower than many tanks did, main tanks in different factions.
And it didn't even cost. It wasn't really a trade-off in any sense. Like you're now more vulnerable or more frail in a sense where it's like, oh, there's a meaningful trade-off here. Do you really want to burn your Serpent Shield? Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah, there was nothing to like. You weren't burning unless you really wanted resilience, but people were not taking those vehicles to protect the units inside. They were taking them as tanks that you paid it was almost the opposite of the normal dedicated transport, where normally you take a transport as a bonus to a squad to move the squad around quicker or provide them some cover. In that edition, it was, no, I take the squad as the tax for taking that transport main battle tank.
Yeah. For taking that transport that basically can count as another heavy support choice, another armored vehicle.
It was not a healthy solution, and it was not what caused that edition to die. That edition, like Taldar, crazy Wraith Knights and stuff being, there's a lot of issues. speaking of additions that, mechanics came along that destroyed them, what do you think, to be very relevant here, allowed 10th to be accepted so soon on the heels of ninth, and ninth itself so soon on the heels of 8th, but specifically 10th, because 10th is not an edition, I think, that's been as well received as the previous edition was.
Okay, so I guess I could talk about this for a fair bit if you'd indulge me, because I actually didn't like ninth all that much. I kind of hated ninth's mission structure. I might have mentioned this in previous talks we've had, but yeah, like ninth edition, for those who can't remember, had a mission structure where you would write your list with specific secondaries in mind, and you'd only have those secondaries. You'd have like a list of 12 or like 12 to 15 options, and you'd have to pick 3. And people would retroactively build their lists for like what's the easiest undeniable secondaries, and then a lot of lists started looking the same, and then everyone had to have their action monkeys to do their actions so they could get those easy secondaries. And I just absolutely hated the structure and what it did to list construction, right? So for me, that was one little notch in the okay, I could look forward to a mix up here, because I just did not like how the mission structure was at all. Another notch as to why, for myself, I think this appealed to some others, because I did a video on the topic towards the end of ninth, and I think there was a lot of good feedback, a lot of synergy, or a lot of similar feelings, rather, from viewers. But it was around just how weak tanks were, like how soft they were, right? I was just like, this is crazy, and this sort of segues into what I think is the real reason why 10th was desired by the vast majority of players. Because I don't know how well you were following 9th at the time, Macca, but 9th has what is probably the most embarrassing back and forth of rules ever. Well, maybe not ever, but to me it's hilarious, because you started with just a baseline over-tuning of AP. Just AP was crazy, right? We came out of 8th edition with the standard for power weapons on infantry models to be AP3. That was sort of the standard for like your power sword, even, right? And then so anything deadly would be AP4, like you'd have some like a Votan railgun or something like that, or a Tau railgun might be AP4, right, on a hammerhead. And then you'd have your stratagems that would, I can increase the AP of this faction and this faction. And this is back in those 9th and 8th edition codexes when you had pages of stratagems, right? So it was quite often, you had means to tool up your AP as well. And there was such a huge AP problem that Games Workshop, over the course of 9th edition, just decided to give invulnerable saves everywhere. And then it was just like, good God, now everything has invulnerable saves. And then, after that, to shore up that problem, they started adding in weapons which ignore invulnerable saves. And then the Demons Codex came out, and guess what they did? They gave Demons a save which could not be... it just didn't even count as invulnerable save. They had to come up with a new terminology. I think it was demonic... The demon saves is what they had, because they couldn't have demons typically use the standard invulnerable save, which they normally would have, because they just would have been just obliterated by the current lay of the land, right? I think it's the AP arms race of 9th edition, let's call it, that made people be like, okay, let's welcome a great reset, because this is so borked, with just... I hope I got the recollection right there, because I'm just kind of like drawing it from memory. But that's essentially the beats of how it was, of like how overtuned it came to be. I think the order's correct. I remember the memes. There was a lot of people making fun of it at the time, and how embarrassing.
So thinking about that,
Does that answer your question? Does that?
yeah, I think so. I think you're getting us onto the crux of the issue now, which is that was a mechanic that was introduced, right? And clearly it was a degrading mechanic over the edition, particularly AP. So is there other situations where this occurred, or a rule that we can apply in hindsight? And I immediately think to myself, okay, if AP was an issue for that edition, what would make AP the issue? Is it that everyone has it? No, it would be that some have it, correct?
Well, it's certainly more proliferous in ninth edition. Like, one of the things I noticed, and I think most people noticed, just going into the 10th edition indexes, was just the vast reductions in AP everywhere, and that's kind of held true, even presently. I think in 10th edition, there are some units where I'm like, ugh, the AP is kind of low for my sensibilities, right? Looking back on ninth edition to like answer your question, I don't I can't recall with certainty if it's just only some factions had it. I think many factions had access to AP and AP boosters, and there's also another mechanic that was just dropped from ninth edition, which was everywhere at the time, which was the previous iteration of Armor of Contempt, which would allow units to, if memory serves, you would just count wound rolls as fails against you. It's like, oh, I'm being attacked while I'm using my stratagem, and on a wound roll of 1, 2, or 3, it's just a failed wound. Like, sorry. I think that's...
Yeah, I'm trying to narrow it down to like a set of criteria. Maybe I'm being too objective about it, but it's like, take 5th edition, right? 5th edition has essentially 2 tiers of the game. Those that were blessed by the holy hand of Matt Ward and Phil Kelly.
Right.
Or something to that effect. You know, your Necrons, your Blood Angels, your Grey Knights, your Space Wolves, your Space Marines, who have all the tools, all the gadgets, all the toys. And then you have the peasants, everyone else, right? All the forgotten factions that, okay, they can win the occasional game, they can be tooled up, but really, you know, it's a 2-tier game system. And that was very disliked. So I would say that a basic rule of thumb, a beginning point, if you will, for what kills an edition is a massive imbalance either in the rules themselves or in the game mechanics that favor another faction. And I would like to give an example to that that's a little bit newer and maybe some of the viewers will be aware of. Again, it's always hard to tell what editions people are most familiar with. But I'm going to pick Age of Sigmar 2nd edition and the Ossiarch Bone Reapers. That's the Bonecast Eternals.
Yes.
So here was in Age of Sigmar 2.0, you had essentially command points, which have become so common in every system since Age of Sigmar in 8th edition, right? And the command point system is basically, you know, spending the few points that you earned to influence the game in a sort of, I'll say, another plane or another dimension, right? Either adding rerolls or adding abilities, scoring, whatever it might be to your army. And instead, this faction had a new mechanic that was specific to them, but had very, very, very similar effects to command points. Like, if they weren't called something different, you would just say, that's command points. And that faction there was no counter to it. They just got it. It was a command point that basically couldn't be cancelled, couldn't be countered. And it's like things like that to me are the definition of cancerous things that are given to the game system, because you've introduced a mechanic that is fair and every faction has it, and then you introduce a new mechanic, which it's fine to have different mechanics to different factions, but when you introduce an uncounterable mechanic, I think that's where it breaks down, because there's no playing around something that can just be pulled out of one's ass, right? and just thrown on you. There is no counter, there is no nothing. You know it's just going to happen at some point in the game, and at most the closest you can come to countering it is trying to bait it out early. But that is not a counterplay, that's just more of a psychological phenom, and is far from going to be a continuously successful strategy, in my opinion. What are your thoughts?
Well, without knowing the the fundamental like core rules of how Age of Sigmar Second Edition functioned, and this competing mechanic of the core stratagem system versus their bespoke Ossiarch stratagem system. I vaguely remember the rules being spoken about that you're referencing, because I did just kind of, when I was curious and I was just looking over their rules, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, it seems like more stratagem bloat from the ninth edition point of view, ninth edition 40k point of view. But I think fundamentally, sorry, to answer your question, fundamentally, I think it makes perfect sense. Like, yeah, if you have a core layer of rules, and then a certain faction has a special army ability or, arm system, game mechanic system for just them that undercuts a core exception, yeah, I think it does begin to... how could that not damage the kind of fabric? Well, whenever you're playing that faction in particular, right, and then compared to everybody else, it does kind of invoke a similar feeling to me as the dice swapping Fate or Miracle dice. But I guess 40k can kind of weather that a bit more, maybe. If I don't know if you agree, if you agree that it's similar or would have the same impact, but maybe 40k can weather it a bit more because they are so frequent with their nerfs and facts and points updates and all of that.
Yeah, I don't know. When it comes to weathering that storm. I might give another example then on that 2.0 Age of Sigmar, which is the faction-specific terrain. So some factions were given terrain that you could purchase from Games Workshop, and some factions still have said terrain. And the way it worked was it was just a passive. It didn't cost you any points to buy. Didn't count towards anything in your army. You could just, if you had this piece of terrain that cost hard money, you could just place it down the table. And it just started buffing your army. It just started giving you free rules. It was not degrading. It didn't debilitate over, the duration of the game or anything like that. So that made it very hard to bait out because it was always going to be there. There was no counter to it. There was no getting rid of it. It was untargetable, indestructible. It was essentially in a mirror universe to the game itself that was being played. And yet it was directly impacting on the game itself.
And not all factions would have one, eh?
And not all factions had one.
Oh, that would be annoying from a personal point of view. It's weird to me because if things are being updated, and this kind of speaks to the points, the topic of balance, but if you're getting updates and facts and erratas and quarterly updates for balance purposes to keep everything in the 45 to 55 optical kind of winning chart threshold of win rates, I want to say that even if you have these kinds of mechanic lacks or unit lacks or product lacks in this case, wouldn't that shore up that difference? But maybe not, because I'm just kind of working through the logic of it with you in real time here. Maybe it wouldn't, because, well, that's only at like top table play, those kinds of updates, right? It's like that kind of balance, and we're kind of saving the balance conversation for a different episode, but those kind of balance updates, in my opinion, aren't like true balance. It's just balance for top table play.
Yeah, that's the specific one, isn't it? It's balance for top table, right?
Yeah.
It's the this is where those number crunching people from the company come in and go, oh, there's a 72.3% win rate for this faction. Let's see what we can do to undo that. And it's like, do you know why that's occurring? And often I think it can be said they don't. Because, people only ever tackle part of the problem, right? Because, I know it's a little bit sidetracked to talk about balance, but when you are trying to balance, there is balancing the rules of the game, like points values and, units, stat lines, yes. But balancing around a cheese's shit Skaven humanoid player, as in the personality of a Skaven in a human body, that is a different kettle of fish. Like tournament players, love them or hate them, have, it's doesn't matter what game they're playing, right? When they get their sweat on, they will bend and break any system to its utmost limit. You can't ever ride around these people.
Well, that's the game in that environment. I think that's just natural. That's like human nature, basically, right? You're playing to win, right? You're trying to become the very best, right?
Exactly right. So the balancing can't be made around those types. The balancing needs to be made around the, encouraging the average Joe playing at their local store to be able to take a bit of a mishmash of just essentially anything from their faction's rules and be able to have fun with it. Right? And I think that's where balance tends to most often fall down. Because, you don't really expect perfect balance. So it should be like, well, I shouldn't just feel like I can never take this unit because it's just going to be crap. Right? And the bigger extension of that, I should never take this army. It's going to be crap.
Oh, no.
Right?
Yeah, that's definitely a bad omen.
System of... Yeah, it's the two-tier system of Warhammer 5th edition. The have-nots and the haves.
Right. So then, I know we don't really want to talk about balance, at least initially, but now that we are, it seems to be certainly a contributor to the desire that makes, or the perception that makes a new edition desirable. Right? Because it's bad internal balance, right? Like, sure, okay, 9th edition might have been the most balanced edition of 40K ever because of those charts at the end, and everything was in the 45 to 55. Beautiful, chef's kiss, right? But that's only in the top tables. There's loads of internal balance problems, like you were saying, where, yeah, there's some... I would never take, hard pass, let's call them. There's some hard pass units. And that's already kind of bad because, there's people out there who for sure have built and painted and lovingly poured their hobby passion into those products, and they're dudes, right? And then there's the next rung up from that, which is there are some hard pass factions back when sub-factions had rules. Right? There's just certain I would never play word bearers in 8th edition, for example. It was just for the vast majority of it was utter dog shit, right?
Okay, so you're striking a particular nerve, we'll say, here for me. So let's go back to 5th edition. I was playing 5th edition Warhammer 40,000 with Chaos, Space Marines, and Chaos Demons.
Mm-hmm.
Codexes badly written by authors who clearly didn't understand what the community wanted, which is community loves legions. They don't really care for the Black Legion. No matter how hard Games Workshop has tried to make it a thing, it's never going to be a thing, right? I mean, granted, there is someone in the comments right now typing, I play Black Legion. Yeah, fuck off. Now,
no. Right? Go ahead. Continue.
Right, but it's people aren't I want to have a mix of Khorne and Tzeentch in my army. No, Chaos plays something. They're no, these guys aren't ever going to fight together. So and the bad, obviously the 5th edition, the Codex was terrible for Chaos. So a new edition of the game gave you that hope, I'm going to get a good Codex now, and then you find out Phil Kelly's writing it. Well,
yeah, there's definitely that that perception, right? That hope that this time I'll have a better go around with my book. You know, they screwed up these factors. Maybe this time they'll get it right.
The cope and seethe crowd, we might call that, maybe just like the wishful, like dying, hopeful prayer. You know, the man in the desert dying.
Oh, it's both. It's both, right?
Right?
Yeah, you're gonna have the people who are just power hungry and they want more, and you're gonna have the people who have just been punished, like Punished Snake over here, just suffering quietly.
But if you play Space Marines, you're like, yeah, I know I'm getting a codex, and yeah, I know I'm gonna get a bunch of new kits. So like, yeah, whatever. So like, well, I'm dying of dehydration in the Chaos Desert. The Space Marine player is, you know, sitting there like just pouring water on the sand because he's bored. Like, I don't want to take this kit. It kind of sucks in my army. And the Chaos player's like, can I have some of those kits, please? You know, things have obviously turned around a bit for Chaos, but there are other factions who are in that boat now. You know, Dark Eldar would probably be my pick for the faction that is just most forgotten, if I had to pick one.
Yeah, you know, we spoke about that a little bit last time. It was like Dark Eldar, GSC, and maybe Votan, just because they're so new. Just have
I mean, Orcs are one of those. Like, I could see Orcs being.
You think so? I think Orcs get pretty.
A 40k. I could see them being a 40k starter set.
Yes, that's my
next edition.
That's my bet for next edition. We should have a pool going.
We should have a pool going. But we both picked the same thing, so it wouldn't be a very.
It wouldn't work. Yeah, it wouldn't work. We need to expand the pool.
Yeah. So like, yeah, you've got those the coping factions, people who are like, well, a new edition offers hope. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's either going to close that balance gap, or maybe it's going to give my faction a long overdue update, whether that might be in miniatures, rules, mechanics. Right, so there's always going to be that group, but then the other one obviously is those who are well-to-do who go, well, I just know I'm going to get even more stuff, so they're going to be happy no matter what, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's really the only sort of way that the balance, quote unquote, for those factions goes to bring on a new edition. So, but when you look at other editions like 8th into 9th, what's the hard sell there? Because it seems to me, as a person who did not play 8th, 9th, or 10th edition 40k, I'm just sort of a lurker, we'll say, just sort of keeping an eye on it, going, if that game ever becomes playable again, I might be interested. Mm-hmm. And I just see it as like, okay, you release 8th, and even if the game mechanics aren't my cup of tea, clearly they were a lot of people's cup of tea. And they released all of the indices for it. So all of the rules for everyone basically simultaneously at the start of the edition. Mm-hmm. And you go, well, there's your game. Like, it's working, it's good, people like it. The balance pass on that really just needs to be expanding those indices with a couple of extra things. But that's not what happened. The more they worked on the edition, the more they tried to add to it, the worse it got. And it's like, well, then why do you want a new edition? Why don't you just want to go back to playing that edition before the company, you know... it's like the monkey paw, right? It's the monkey paw edition. Like, oh, I want Games Workshop to give me a codex. You know, finger curls menacingly on the paw.
Oh yeah, there's certainly a risk of that always happening. I mean,
what? There's no bikes. It's like, what?
Yeah. Well, 8th to 9th is... It was framed at the time as a refining of what everyone likes, right? Now, 8th edition started out as like this beautiful, balanced, like you alluded to just now, this index period that was just like everyone's on an even playing field. Everyone got new rules at the same time. It felt good. 10th edition felt similarly for the same reason. But the key difference in 8th edition's expansion and rollout is that these codexes, man, like you went from everyone having only indexes to factions getting their codexes, and those codexes adding in a whole layer of rules that those armies would have, and others were still running just their index, so they didn't have the slew of relics 3 pages of stratagems, etc., right? And like, so like, yeah, naturally it's gonna be like, man, I'm waiting for my power up, right? That's how it very much felt in 8th edition for your codex. In 9th edition, if memory serves, it was so similar that Games Workshop, I believe, said you just use your 8th edition codex. It'll just work fine until you get your new 9th edition codex. I'm pretty sure that was the... Yeah. I'm like 99% sure. So I guess it was a best of both worlds, right? Like you weren't reset. You got to have your previous, toolkit, your previous selection of rules that you might have just gotten if you were like the last, right? The last codex, such as the Curse of the Last Codex of an Edition, right? So that burn wasn't too felt for those last books. And then mechanically, I just like I sort of checked out from playing 9th edition. I played very few games, all like across the totality of it. I mean, it was also the pandemic edition, so there's that factor as well. But
yeah,
regardless of that, yeah, I haven't exactly. It's hard for me to make a sales pitch for 9th edition because I just didn't have the enthusiasm for it.
I will never not get over the fact that during the pandemic they just went ahead and just said, well, our releases are all just going to happen exactly when they're scheduled to anyway. It's like just no thought given to, people who bought codexes haven't even had a chance to play a game yet. They're like, no, new editions coming, boys. Like, this is a battle. Sister Battle was one of those.
Yeah, they were the last of, I think, 8th edition, and it was like immediately. Well, maybe not immediately, but small campaign to close off the edition, and then actually in 8th edition it was a bit longer. It went on for quite a few months, actually, the whole Psychic Awakening thing.
And then you had, funny enough, that was coming out of COVID was also the Age of Sigmar 3.0,
right,
which did not sell particularly well. People can say what they want in the comments about how well they think it sold in their area, but I've got a lot of, evidence, I guess circumstantial, whatever.
I've heard similar, right? And if we go by the metric that Games Workshop essentially only produces enough that they want to sell so they can be out of stock for premium product that's hard to obtain, I think that the fact that there's excess of Skaventide, and what was the other one? I can't remember.
Yeah, that's how iconic it was. Yeah. Neither of us can remember what it was called.
Whatever it was called.
But I had got sent a lot of pictures of it just clogging up shelves, and even at independent retailers discounted, or as much as they could discount it, just to get the stock moving, right? Mm-hmm. And that happened not just coming out of COVID for Age of Sigmar, where it was just sort of dropped out of the blue, because that's probably about the time when they really started using quote-unquote influencers. Before that, I didn't notice a lot of people being given free kits, but that Age of Sigmar launch is when I noticed a lot of the painting channels all suddenly popping up with kits.
Oh, is that right? Interesting correlation.
Yeah, that's about the time when it began. Maybe because of COVID, they were exploring new marketing avenues for the product because the obviously in stores couldn't be a thing at that time.
That makes sense.
I'm guessing that's what the relationship is. I don't know. But then also the same thing happened with this edition, where like the selling point for that box is really just people going, oh, I like new Skaven models. I'm seeing a awful lot of Stormcast up on like eBay and that from, it seems like the Skaven half was selling to Skaven players as a sort of pseudo getting started in Skaven box. But then that goes to say, here is obviously the counterpoint to our main topic. Those two boxes and those editions were not instant successes for their communities. They've done all right. And I'm not going to say that they're bad additions to the game, because they're not. but clearly there was not the same sort of level of hype around them as, say, a Warhammer 40,000 launch.
Very
And
interesting.
I don't think that's because the Warhammer 40,000 community is so much bigger. It is bigger, but I think proportional to the size of the community, the hype was a lot less, right? If you've got 4 people in the Sigmar community and 16 in the 40k community, and 2 people in your Sigmar community are excited, that's 50% of people, right? If you have, if you got 9 of your 16 people excited for 40k, well, that's well over 50%. So, proportionally, it doesn't matter if it's less people playing. It depends how many are actually hyped up for it. And I don't think people were hyped for them, because although there were issues, the issues I don't think had built up to the extent for Age of Sigmar in any edition except the first, to such a level where it became detrimental to the system. Where people were like, no, this needs a hard reset because it's become unplayable. I think every edition has had its issues along the way, but they never were unplayable. And so Age of Sigmar has just sort of happened into new editions constantly. It doesn't feel like it was like with 40k, it almost feels natural. Like the game gets so crap each edition that it has to have a hard reset.
Well, it's I feel a little unfair talking on it. I mean, I'm far more familiar with 40k's like scape than the state of play of Age of Sigmar, right? So I mean, I'm inclined to agree, but little asterisk there. It's sort of unrelated.
It does have to be an asterisk. I agree.
Sort of unrelated, but a thought occurred to me from what you're describing with the starter boxes. Do you suspect the lack of hype or the lack of positive reception towards these Age of Sigmar starter boxes is because GW wants to frame Stormcast Eternals as the popular power fantasy poster boy face of the fantasy setting, the way Space Marines is for their sci-fi setting? I think that's GW's perception of them, but I don't know if it's as popular. I don't know if what I'm wondering is popular. Would that box set have been better received if it was Cities of Sigmar versus Skaven? That's what I'm wondering, right? That's where I'm going with this.
Maybe, but I think Cities of Sigmar was too soon before those box sets, so it's too much overload of the one faction and therefore boring. Your best starter set is always going to be 2 factions that haven't had an update in a while, in my opinion.
Makes sense, right? Well, so for the sake of the hypothetical, opinion,
right? Can I just throw this is just a totally just Macca-ism, I guess you can call it, just a little whingy gripe. At what point do you become an expert in something? I've been playing this for over 30 years. At what point is it just like, maybe some ideas aren't so terrible? Like, I hate having to preface everything I say with I feel like I'm being waterboarded. Getting the acknowledgement of Warhammer country here.
Listen, this is a safe space. You can speak freely here. Okay.
Yeah, it's in my opinion, after consulting with the experts, people who have not got shit in a long time tend to like new stuff. People who have been overloaded with the same boring faction for 7 straight years tend to be a bit over it.
Yeah, you get unit bloat. It comes with fatigue, right?
Right, you can call this Macca's law if you like. And in this, it's like Isaac Newton has, his rules of, laws of motion. Well, I've got the laws of Warhammer motion, right? So in my set of laws, the faction which is always getting new miniatures and new hype and new rules will always have players tend to gravitate towards it because that faction is a safe bet. It's being supported. It's got the hype going on around it constantly. It's on the covers of all the books and it's in the spotlight, and staff are pressured in stores to sell those sort of items to incoming people, right? That's where the sales pressure is.
Mm-hmm.
So And the inverse of this is they get the sales for said item. The companies take away from this because they don't do actual market research. They do spreadsheet research. Is they look at it and they go, this sold very well. Must be popular. Well, let's continue to sell that. This is the first law of Macca's law of tabletop gaming. And the second, obviously, to this is factions which have not been supported for a long time will have a huge uptick in sales from the community that is into said faction. But if said community is disenfranchised for too long, they have no incentive to buy into the new miniatures and will instead defiantly stick with the existing ones. Case in point, those who have Warhammer the Old World. Many people simply have used their old Warhammer the Old World armies as opposed to buying new Warhammer the Old World armies because they've been disincentivized for so long. And let's face it, the models are the old models, apart from a couple of kits, right?
Right.
There is no incentive there for them to actually buy new models. They're like, oh, fuck giving this company money. They killed my game off previously.
Well, they took it away for a few years. Why you don't want to? You're not in the mood to reward it necessarily, right? Like,
exactly. You can't tell me that when they released the Orc, snake bites or whatever, 40k, that did not see good sales from Orc players, right? Or when they finally upgraded the Orc buggies to like those 4 new buggies from the old Gorka Morka plastic kit, right? That they didn't see a good uptick in sales. So like these things are related, right? This is just my minor analysis. So when it comes to an Age of Sigmar, if you had a faction that is interesting and hadn't been touched for a long time, probably a smaller faction, let's say something like, I don't know, Daughters of Cain.
Great pick. Right?
Have them and Skaven in the starter box. I think you have a much more popular product.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree.
But coming off the back of the 4th straight Stormcast Eternals, which again, Games Workshop really wants them to be a thing. I kind of feel like it's like Votann is in 40k. And in fact, Votann and I will say Cities of Sigmar represent a slight change in direction for the company. And I say a slight change because we're really just talking about moving from one side of the river to the other. We're not actually, getting onto a different river here, in that they are much more expansive and pushed releases than what has come previously for a faction. Example of that would be a very extreme example would be Khorne Berserkers. Okay,
like the World Leaders,
you have
the 9th edition, like right at the end there.
Yeah. Exactly. Where it's like, here is half a dozen kits, kiss the ring on my finger, bow to me, buy your models, and please go away until we release the remainder of your miniatures sometimes in the next edition. That's what I think is going to happen.
That was my suspicion as well.
Well, it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Like, by the way, here's the Terminator.
Surprise, right? Never saw it coming.
Yeah, here's the new Bloodletting sculpt, whatever, right? And it's like, you get that, but then you get a Votann or a Sigmar. It's just like, every week it feels like there's a new thing coming out. It's like, hang on a minute. This is a new faction that's just dropped out of nowhere, and it's actually got more miniatures than many established factions that have been in the game for several years do. What's going on here?
Is that the case with Cities of Sigmar? I admittedly, I don't follow it as well as I do 40k. But I don't think Votann has had too many releases. They've had 2 kill teams, but I think that's all.
So, Cities of Sigmar has 37 items in there. Granted, a couple of those are books. But 37, remember, things like your Fire Slayers is only like 7.
Yeah, that's fair. Fair point. When you think of Fire Slayers and Daughters of Cain, fair point.
Yeah. And there are many factions like that, Granted, Sigmar does have a lot of carryovers from old Warhammer the Old World, but you're still talking in unique Sigmar kits. They have not been separated out as much into sub-boxes, we'll say. They're very dependent on their spearhead battle forces. But you're still talking like 1, 2... probably 2 or 3 core infantry, some war machines, a crap load of characters, like 8, 9 characters, including like several gargantuan creatures, like the sort of flying lions type things that they've got. Whereas in like a Fire Slayers, it's just the same big like dragon creature with just 3 different riders. You know, like it's very different levels of effort being put in.
No, that's a fair comparison. Like I guess I was just out of touch, so to speak, with the Cities of Sigmar range.
Yeah, and I'm just going to have a quick look at Leagues of Votann.
They're more than World Eaters, but not. I think Cities of Sigmar beats them.
So
unit count.
It does, although remember half of Cities of Sigmar is ported over from the old Warhammer Fantasy battles.
Right.
But Votann, if you take away the cards and that's still 15 releases. So that's twice what the World Eaters got. Granted, 2 of those are kill teams, but still,
yeah.
That's World Eaters have what? A guy on a Juggernaut, some terrible possessed, Khorne Berserkers.
Yeah, so World Eaters is a pitiful release.
So it's 4, and Angron's 5, right? 5 units.
Yeah.
So you're talking 3 times as many releases. It's just an interesting thing. Like, are they trying something different? Like, tiny release for some like factions, and then like a tentpole release where they're really like trying to go, can we sell a whole faction at once? I would prefer them to do that. I think it's
I agree. I think it is better, though. In the case of Votann, I think they came out before World Eaters, if I remember correctly.
They did.
Yeah, I think.
Which is again why it's not a course correction. It's not, as I said, going onto a different river. They just moved across the same river. Like
I can't help but read the World Eaters release as corporate, knowing they can sell a codex because of a Primarch model. That is enough.
Well,
that is enough of a key to jangle or to dangle.
If you want to take that to its sort of a good example of that, I think, is Sisters of Battle, because they had that COVID era. They had that COVID era sort of launch. You had your basic battle sisters. You had your Arco-Flagellants, your Penitent Engines, your Immolator. The classic stuff. But then they got another codex very early into 9th edition, which added the Paragon War Suits, added the special character in the Paragon War Suit, and a bunch of other stuff, right?
Yeah, they're a great example to the contrary.
Yeah, I feel like that is the trajectory the World Eaters are on.
Oh, and like another big, well, not another big, but I would assume another release at least of the same size. And that kind of pads them up relatively well. They slap in Khorne Demons in the book as well, if they, make those units accessible. And then you have a pretty sizable collection of units now, It doesn't feel as slim.
Yeah. So, this all sort of, to go back to the main topic at hand, is to sell an edition, you need to, if your edition is not such a shit show, forgive the language, that it's instantly people are just like, oh, thank God there is a new edition coming. Like, I can't stand this one. Like, when you get that exodus in an edition where people just stop playing it to move to other systems.
Yeah, it happens. It's just everyone feels, what's the point?
7th edition.
Yeah.
7th edition 40K hemorrhaged players to Horus Heresy. And they were like, oh, this is so much better than 7th. And then 8th edition instantly pulled them back. And thank God, flush the toilet. As a Heresy player, the attitude of 40K tournament players being brought over to Heresy was not a fun time to be a Heresy player. Just the min-maxing. But
yeah.
It was against everything the community that was established in Heresy wanted.
Well,
and that influx of players with plastic kits just, oh no.
That is what I deal with on the regular. I'm trying to bring the I'm a thematic player, playing advocate, right? So I often, well, not often. It's been said by some that I have a soul of a 30k player who's playing 40k, and everyone wants to just power game, and I'm over here trying to have a thematic time.
That's a huge part of the reason, honestly, why I stopped playing 40k. Huge part of the reason. But yeah, so you've got the Exodus is occurring. Once the Exodus is occurring, that's the impetus for a new edition right there, you know? Whereas Age of Sigmar never had the hemorrhage, the great hemorrhage, we'll call it, where the game had just gotten so bad, it was just unplayable, and people were screaming, clambering for a new edition. So it's like, if you haven't got that, then you're trying to sell a new edition on it being better than the previous edition, and just going like, yeah, last edition was good, but this is even better. But that's a trick you can only pull so many times, right? Because every edition since 7th has included in the marketing the best edition of Warhammer 40,000 yet.
Right.
I feel like every one of those needs a little asterisk and, citation needed, but again, I digress. So, all right, you can only pull that card so many times where people go, yeah, that's just the marketing spin, right? But it definitely worked with 8th edition. This is better than everything before.
Right.
And people bought into that, right? They drank the Kool-Aid. But if that doesn't work, your third and final option is really cool miniatures.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's totally agreeable. Like, it's weird to me because sorry, I mean interrupt you. Go ahead.
No. Go for gold.
I'm just gonna take a little side quest here, and just inquire with you. In the case of Horus Heresy, so there's no long list of factions in the same sense there is in Age of Sigmar and 40k. Like, those two game systems seem to be on a very similar template, right? Whereas Horus Heresy, there's some fewer factions, so you can't pad out codexes every 6 weeks or whatever the number is for those other game systems, right? So
yes.
When does Games Workshop feel like, oh, it's time for a new edition? Like, what spurred 2.0? And what will spur 3.0 if those rumors are true, right?
Okay, so that's two different questions.
My humblest apologies.
No, that's quite all right. So the short of it is 1.0 had a decade of life in it.
Yeah, which is amazing, right? Like, what a game system. It feels good.
And it was so well written because the person who wrote it genuinely gave it their best crack, right? And it only started falling apart in the last 5 minutes where subpar writers, I don't want to throw too much shade at them as people, but they were not doing a great job with what they were given because it could have been because of management, could have been because of their own personal hubris or lack of skills.
Sure. It's not personal, right? It's just,
or sometimes just
is.
Bad luck, right? It could be a host of reasons. Scope creep, COVID, whatever, right? And you had these fantastic books full of art and fluff and rules, and it felt very much like a lot of the rules might have been written, because I know Alan Bly had once commented they'd written all the Primarch rules before they released any of the books. And that meant that things stayed really consistent. Like, the power level between them was all very, very good over a 10-year period, and it took 9 years to release all of the Primarch's rules. And yet they were as good as each other right up to the end. So it's like, okay, this is balance-wise, that's what you want in a system, right?
Oh, yeah.
But the subpar writers came along, and suddenly the books went from giving you basically 4 factions, or if it was less than 4, like really fleshed out whole new factions. So, for example, the Ultramarines book only had Ultramarines as a new legion, but it gave you the full Imperialis militia list in there. So, entire new army list in the book with all of the special rules for militia. Plus, it gave a bunch of additional stuff to word bearers. And it's like, okay, well, that's a good trade-off. Whereas by the time you got to the very last book, it was, here's the Dark Angels rules, and here's a couple of additional Night Lords units, and that is it. And the book was the same price as what had come before, but it was a solid third less in length. And then
Bad optics. And bad outcomes.
we went into a period of silence. There was no FAQs coming. There was no new products coming. It was just this blank period. And then they started the last chance to buy. They just started killing off all of their range at Forge World, trying to, I guess, downsize the SKU bloat that had occurred. So instead of targeting, 40k and the Space Marines line, they targeted 30k especially heavily, and just started getting rid of, shoulder pads gone, torsos gone, all the things that 30k players actually cared about, which was converting and modifying their guys into their chosen legions, helmets, whatever, right? All of that started to vanish, and Heresy players were just felt like, oh no, this is not good, right? Then they stopped selling Betrayal at Kelth, they stopped selling the Burning Prospero, so now your plastic kits were gone. And therefore, when second edition came along, it was like, okay, they actually care. They're going to put effort into this one. It's like, here's a new box set, and it's full of plastics as well. And then, I won't go into whether or not the plastics in it were my cup of tea. It doesn't matter, right? It's irrelevant to the discussion. The fact is, there were new rules, new miniatures, and they said that, yep, we're going to release a bunch more stuff in plastic. So the hype, hits that peak, right? And therefore, people are reinvigorated. They want that new edition. But then over the course of second edition, the company just slips up and shows that, it's actually the same old Games Workshop running things, because we're not going to address any of the issues that the community is openly saying are out there with this edition. We just are turning a complete blind eye to the problems and giving it zero support where it needs it. We're just going to release plastic tanks, essentially, for 3 years, is essentially what 2.0 devolved into, to sum it up. And therefore, now they're saying, well, we're going to release a third edition. And so the hope of the community, if I may be so bold as to say community and encompass everyone, is that it will take on board the criticisms of 2.0's rules, which are a lot less tight than the first edition, and it will try and address some of these. My big concern with this is that it's not probably going to do that, because I've been burned enough times over the last 30 years to know not to touch that particular hot stove anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They do not give us the FAQs we want. They give us the FAQs that they feel like when they feel like. They do not give us the kits we ask for. They give us the kits they want to sell us when they feel like selling them to us.
Yeah, no, I totally, not to cut you off here, but I can recall probably more than one of your videos relating to each of these topics, just from my own, watching of your channel. I remember you did an analysis where you're looking at even just the frequency and the density and even the quality of the PDF rule updates for second edition Horus Heresy and 10th edition 40k.
Yeah.
And it was like a rather stark disparity in 40k's favor. So I don't fault you at all for not being encouraged by the prospect of a new edition at all.
I'm cynical enough, and I know enough about plastics and manufacturing and sculpting and these sort of things, just enough to be dangerous to myself. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, every 6 months you got an expansion book to the game system. That expansion book is announced about a month to 2 months after the last one, so that they can get that look what's coming hype started, right? And then the hard pitch to sell it happens in that last month. Right, you get your leak. Here's some Emperor's Children shoulder pads. you know, right? And then slowly they build that hype up until they build to the full release. It's fine. It's a perfectly acceptable marketing pattern, right? And then as soon as it's released, the you snap your fingers like Thanos, and then it vanishes from Warhammer community.
Oh, dude,
not to be seen
that's
again,
like every
right?
it's ripe for memeage because that's every week in Warhammer community. It's like memory
It's
hole.
hilarious,
Forget about previous product. We have new product here. Take a look at this. Look at this, right?
It's absolutely hilarious.
Yeah.
And so obviously with Horus Heresy, it's all of a sudden like, oh, the plastic kits have started drying up, and all you're dropping is the occasional character now. You haven't announced another, book coming up. Like, people put two and two together, even if there weren't your Valrax of the world putting out rumors and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
People can put two and two together, and they go, all right, you're not doing anything. You haven't released an FAQ for the edition since God knows when, right? Your last FAQ.
Right.
And when they have released FAQs for Heresy, they have been some of the most... Like, I would encourage you to go and look them up. They are the most hilarious FAQs ever. You yourself know how many things get FAQ'd in a 40k release. A Heresy release of a 200-page book will have a single entry FAQ, just a single topic addressed. You're like, really? One? You did that perfect of a bang-up job. You're only going to address one thing. So you put up a PDF on the Warhammer community website and put one single thing in there. And it's not a thing that anyone has ever called a problem, typically. It's just like whatever the authors felt was like really easy to address is it's like, I don't know how they do it. Maybe they like put all the issues up on a dartboard and they just throw darts and whatever like gets hit. It's like, that's the one that's going in the FAQ. And people will be like, oh, what about, this rule on contemptors, or the fact you can technically stuff a Storm Eagle full of infantry and then shove it up the arse of a Stormbird. So your flyer can spit out miniature flyers on the battle. Those don't get touched, but they'll be like, oh, on this page, there should be a full stop earlier in this sentence, and this should start a new sentence. It'll be something like that, and you're like, what the hell? Obviously, it's a funny environment to play in Heresy, but it speaks to two very different, like, drivers of what kills an edition, because one is just neglect. Nothing for a year, total radio silence coming out of COVID, the death of the guy who was involved in the game system, people who took over from him not doing a good job, and then after this long period of complete radio silence and removal of tons of kits as well, all of a sudden, new game edition, all new plastic kits dropping people. That's like, holy crap, right? But second edition is no, it's just a slow trickle of releases with just a mediocre version of the game, and then obviously the whole community is sort of in that bit of a cope thing, to the point where people just openly say to me, like, Macca, if they release the third edition, I don't think I'm just going to buy any of the books. I think I'm just going to pirate the PDFs, because I bought all these books and they cost hundreds of dollars, because Heresy is not like, it's not like 40k where you can pretty much just buy a codex, maybe the occasional campaign book if they put something in there for you, but you probably can just get away with your main codex. Heresy is like every campaign book adds like whole units to every roster for most armies.
Those black books, right? Is what you're referring to?
Yeah,
they're dense.
So I've got all 9 of the original black books, and I have all of the campaign books plus the rule books and that for the second edition. It's thousands of dollars here of investment, and I've got people who've made the same sort of investment, just saying they don't put the effort into the books, so they're not the collectible item they used to be. And I paid for all these recently, and I'm not going to be bribed into buying the books again. I think it's a rot, and that's just people are openly saying that to me in significant enough numbers that I would be very interested to plot the data on a graph. Let's just say that. So it's a very, very different driver to 40k, where 40k I think very much obviously apart from the 3 year cycle, 40k tends to fall into that migratory game's crap. Let's move to something else. Oh, game's good again. Come back, everybody back.
Yeah, well, it's in 40K's case. Like, I wonder how much of that is served by the cultural shift of it being more perceived as a competitive gaming system, which makes me want to throw up. But I believe that is the general perception of how people look at it, right? What you're describing with Horus Heresy's pathway to a new edition, right? The final steps here is like very disheartening because it seems like a very scummy or cynical way to like let's make the prospect of a new edition exciting by just neglecting the current space. Like, that's so gross to me. This is like the worst way. The worst way to build hype for an edition is just to neglect everybody's investment and then say, "Hey, over here, guys, this is where we're going to reward your investment, but you have to buy this into this investment too."
Yes, Horus Heresy has been that way for a long time. It survives. You know, there's a famous saying: the British founded an empire in spite of their government. Well, Heresy has survived in spite of Games Workshop. It's a community-driven game. More than any of the others, it's the community that drives it.
Yeah, I could agree with that.
You cannot say that of 40K. 40K follows the company. Whatever the company does changes the meta. That meta is followed by the community. Yes, there are narrative players. The narrative players, I do not think, are visible enough to have an impact to actually modify the course of things.
No, I don't think so. My perception is like it's way like I said earlier. It's a perceived. The general perception, I think, is one of a competitive play space with lots of podcasts covering competitive, win rates and whose lists went to top tables, and like it's like a cultural shift, like over the course of 8th, maybe even earlier. Maybe it started in 7th. I don't know.
Yeah, so I guess out of the 3 core game systems, there are very different factors which cause the game system to get a new edition. Heresy, it's neglect. 40K, it's...
I call it a hamster wheel, personally.
Well, Tim from Horus always says it's the white anting. He says, you introduce termites into your game system, you deliberately ruin it to make the next edition more lucrative. He may have something to that, I'm just saying. But no, Age of Sigmar, it's just models. That's really the driver for the new edition. It's not like... I don't think any of the editions have been bad, except for the first. 2nd, 3rd, and 4th are all just side grades to one another to me. Like, yes, they improve some areas. Others are like complete non-entities. It's just they're all fine.
Yeah,
I would play any edition happily.
It's like 8th through 10th or 3rd through 7th in that sense, right? They're building on the same fundamental core concepts.
Yeah, if you go back to, like, if you said to me, Macca, you have to play 2nd, 3rd, or 4th Age of Sigmar, I'd be like, okay. But if you said to me, Macca, you have to play, 6th or 7th 40K, I'd be like, I really, really, no. Can I, like, kiss a granny or something instead? Like, give me the dare. I don't want to do that. 40K hamster wheel, maybe. I would say 40K feels more like if an obsessive compulsive person was writing a game system, where it's like, when you've got someone, they think that, like, the bench is... I spilt something on the bench. No, I think I can still see the stain, and they just keep washing that spot. They sit down, they watch TV for a bit, and they walk past the bench and they go, I reckon that's the outline, that stain still. They can't, they wipe it again, right? That sort of feels to me like 40K is. Like, they just keep, like, they make a system that kind of works at the start of the edition, and then they just keep, like, rubbing it and washing it a little bit more, and just, what if I had this game mechanic? What if I had this codex? What if I do this thing? and they just keep messing with it, and it gets worse every time they touch it.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh no, it's like Mr. Bean or something. Like every time they try and make it better, they make it worse. It's like they broke the priceless Ming vase.
Well,
they tried gluing it together, and that doesn't quite work. So they tried taping it together, and that's not quite working. And now it's covered in glue and tape, and that's what 40K feels like.
It definitely does feel like you're stacking these bricks unevenly, trying to build something over the course of an edition. And I wonder how much of that is, and this is part of where I wish I could see like the authors of codexes, like how many different people are taking on these different projects. Is it the same people? Because I wonder how much of it is different people working under tight timelines because the next release is also coming out, right?
Like, well, that's what I said before. Managerial pressure is obviously a thing, right? Because I think Games Workshop is one of the few companies that I know of in a manufacturing industry where production is not. It appears to me like production is just a total afterthought. Like they've just gone, let's just release whatever the marketing team decides. And screw if the factory can actually produce this thing. Like, they'll work it out, they'll band-aid solution the problem, and until we've gotten to the point now where they're like, maybe we need another factory. It's like, you're going to slow down your release rate for, 40K, and oh, no, we can't do that. Like, because we've got to give that shareholder investment, get that return cranking along constantly.
Their inability, I have no indication that they're trying to support a game system with the way they manage their inventory. It seems very clear they have a business model of Warhammer community selling a new release. They produce essentially enough to sell out, which usually happens, and they hit their margins, and they feel good about it, and I feel as though they're content with keeping the inventory of copious amounts of models from all sorts of factions just unavailable.
Yeah, if I had $1 for every comment I had on a video in the last probably 5 years of people saying, I wanted to buy X is not being in stock, and it has not been in stock for this many months, or in some cases over a year.
Oh.
I would not need to be in YouTube, and I would probably not need a full-time job.
Just, yeah. Speaks
the
volumes.
Amount of comments I've had would be, I'm not going to give you any hyperbole here. It is probably in the 4 digits area.
Nice.
Which makes sense because that's, a discussion topic that I've had many times on the channel. So there's some bias here. I mean, I guess I'm encouraging to some extent those comments because I do say,
well, it is interesting data.
Like you are.
Yeah, like it is genuinely interesting feedback to see, like, because we only have the input points of our local areas and the online store.
Tell you, I can't get this, and obviously the height of that is the FOMO releases, which I'm going to say hit their peak around COVID. There have been ups and downs prior and post, but think like Sisters of Battles, right? So it's like new tentpole release, beloved faction, nowhere near enough boxes, getting scalped everywhere, right? That business model, I think, has sort of hit its natural end point because people are just not doing it anymore. I don't think people have the disposable income to do it anymore. I don't think, apart from maybe the Siege of Terror books, that the scalpers have had a particularly good time in the last sort of few releases, possibly because the last few releases have been less, interesting, and they have sort of taken enough of a bashing in forums of various kinds from the community, I think, that they now do extra kits. Like when they did Leviathan, for example, they're like, oh, okay, this is popular. All right, we're going to open up we're going to make additional production.
I recall that being the case for Leviathan and maybe a few other of the larger box sets.
Sisters of Battle, though, was not like that. Sisters of Battle was here we're releasing it, and then it was like people scalping them for $700, for $280 box or whatever. That's hit its natural endpoint. I just don't see it really happening as much anymore. And part of that's the company doing the right thing, but also people are just not falling for that scummy tactic. And again, you see it in forums, people are just like, yeah, I'll wait a month. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah, people have been burned too many times, right? They don't want to queue up in that awful web store and go through the wait and the, you'll be logged in when, we reach your place in the queue.
Oh
Then
yeah.
only to put it in there, only to put it in their cart, get to check out, and then be
Oh
told,
man,
get
totally,
fucked.
totally
Check out.
unrelated, but like, okay, so I enjoy painting the models of this hobby, right? As one does, and sometimes I want to say like, oh, you know what? How do the heavy metal guys do this model? What colors did they use? Or let me take a look at how they went about. I just want to get some reference, whatever. The amount of times I would have to go to the store to look up a unit or a model and have to be put into a queue is just like, it's definitely caused some sort of PTSD trigger for me with that old website, because it just drove me up the wall. It felt like constantly. And then I know I'm also just contributing to the problem of people trying to buy stuff, so then I feel bad. It was just a huge mess. It's awful. They need a website. This is a total tangent. But Games Workshop needs a website where you can just look at the units, not as products to buy, but as units in a game, right? In a really cool timeline where we don't live, they would also have rules on that website, right? But whatever. I'm happy to concede just to have a website with the pictures and the rotations of the units for play and lore purposes and for painting references.
So I was contacted by a lovely subscriber who used to work for the company back in the old 90s days of Games Workshop in North America. And they wanted to create a website, and the company in England was dead set against it, but basically just said, you're in America, you do your thing. So they created the original Games Workshop website, basically. And then GW Proper said, oh, this is kind of cool, and co-opted it. And the original website, for those who remember, like, we're talking late 90s, early 2000s, very different beast. Okay? Very, I don't know, closer to White Dwarf, maybe? It's hard to describe. Maybe there's a Wayback Machine where you can go and view the 1990s Games Workshop website, but you would go in there and it was more like talking about the fluff of a faction, and you didn't just go in, it showed you all the units. It would have like a big boxes on the screen that said like the HQ, and then you click HQ, it's like, these are the people that lead your army, these are the generals, and give you the rundown. And then you'd scroll down, there'd be the pictures of the different, at that time, white metal characters.
Right.
And you like click on it, and it's like, this is the Force Commander. The Force Commander is the highest ranking Space Marine. He's really good in close combat, And this is the Librarian. He can cast psychic powers, which is kind of like magic in this science fiction setting. And this is the Chaplain. He's the heart and soul of the chapter. He is less aggressive than the others, but has far greater resilience thanks to his Rosarius. And that's the way it would talk you through. It was like really, really cool, right? And then they clean missed when websites was like hit and online sales hit. They missed it by probably half a decade to a decade, and then they sort of retroactively went, oh, actually, people buy tons of shit through websites. And then they started realizing, like, oh, people from Australia, they're actually buying from the UK through our website and just shipping it directly to Australia and saving tons and tons of money. It's massively undercutting our Australian retail stores. Oh, better close that loophole, and then 10 years after that, then they closed the Forge World loophole that did the same thing. But it was they just had no clue, just no fucking clue how to do a website. And then they've just progressively, like 3 times now, I've watched 3 times the website just get significantly worse with each incarnation. And just, you think to yourself, how could you make a website worse than the last one? And then they do it. It's impressive. Because, like, you're at the point now where you click on something like, oh, I go into, I want to go into more. because like it doesn't list all the games. You've got to go, oh yeah, Warhammer 40,000, Age of Sigmar, Horus Heresy, Old World, Middle Earth, and then just nebulously lists more, and you're like, what the hell is more? And then you go in there, and it's like White Dwarf officially licensed, so you can go like, I don't know, buy some Gundams, fiction, Warhammer gifts, build and paint, other games. And it's like, oh, other games. Okay, what's in here? And then it's like Kill Team, Necromunda, and then Warcry, Underworlds, Curse City. It's like, then you navigate into it and you're like, okay, maybe I'll look at what this Necromunda is all about. And then you click on it. And then you scroll down the page and it like tells you a little bit of fluff, and there's a few things for sale, like usually like just random characters and stuff. And you're like, oh, okay, where's like the starter box and like how does this work? And then you don't realize that there's actually a tab up near the top of the screen, and it says shop in little text, and I mean little text, like size 8. It's like shop, view all, and then you have to click on that.
Oh, this is terrible. I'm going through it with you right now. This is awful.
Click on that, it then opens up everything all at once. It just throws the entire game system at you. And then you're like, oh, what the hell? And then you have to go up to filters again on the top, and filters is above all the categories that are going on here. Then you have to click on filters, know what you're trying to filter out, and it's not like filtered by gang, it's filtered by the product types. New releases, online only, available while stocks last, cards, digital, hardback, material, is it resin, is it plastic, product type, base, digital product, gaming accessory, miniature kit, rulebooks, cards. And then after you go through all of that, then it's like, oh, I guess here's the gangs.
Here's what you're looking to filter.
And this is where it gets better. If you click on a gang, like, I don't know, House Cawdor, right? It doesn't matter. They're all the same for the purpose of this. You then you have to click view results. You can't just click the box and then just go click on the screen. You have to click results, or else the screen freezes up. You can't scroll, you can't do nothing, right? Then you're like, okay, this is cool. Can I see these side by side with someone else? You go back to filters, and then you click the next house. So let's click House Escher. Oh, okay. It just removed the previous filter.
Oh my god, it's so bad.
Side.
Dude, I didn't even know it was this bad.
Masterclass. It's a masterclass in making a terrible website. I love it. It's just like, how? How did you do this?
You just have like a mono filter?
Did you hire a company that does web design? Or did you hire a good company who said, this is what you need to do, and you just soundly ignored them and said, no, this is what I want anyway, and they just sort of sighed and just went, okay, whatever, you're paying the bills this month. Sure, Games Workshop, let's go with that. And they just caved into, like, I don't know, Tom Kirby's demands from like the dementia ward or something, like his old man yelling at cloud demands. So people think I'm like really hyperbolic and going after Games Workshop all the time. I'm Macca, you're so mean to the billion-dollar companies. Like, no, they do things like this. This is not the actions of a professional company. I'm sorry, it's not.
Yeah, we can add. I don't know. It's not unreasonable to expect a professional standard from a professional company, especially one that's like incredibly profitable.
So I laugh about it, and I genuinely challenge the viewers to go to the website and just, especially the other games is the worst section, but Middle Earth's not great. Middle Earth is not great, but go find the other game section and just look at how small these selection boxes are. Like, if you do not realize they're there, you do miss them. Like, I've genuinely gone to make videos before and had to remake the video because I'm like, let's go find this. And I sit there scrolling for 5 minutes. I'm like, you know what? I need to find it first and then start recording and then change to that screen so I can show it. It's the only way I'm going to make this work. I've gone through that before. It's horrible. YouTuber problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so, it's completely off topic, but it's hilarious, right?
Yeah.
So
it's baffling.
What sells the game, and not that.
No.
And I mean, that's if you can even get them on the website in the first place, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. It would just be really nice to have a website where you would have a logical layout through which you could explore factions and the game system.
They had that. It was called the Games Workshop website.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they updated it, 3 times, and now it's this. So, and part of that's probably because of the SKU bloat. They've just got so many items.
It's
that
that.
they
That's fair. I mean, that's understandable. They do.
But like, you can go to hardware stores that are stocking thousands of different size bolts and fittings, and I know because I'm an engineer, right? So I'm constantly going through trying to find parts for machinery, and you know, and they can successfully show you the pictures of everything, describe all of its specifications.
Yes, you're right.
Articulated data, like, it can be done.
I will elect to change my position on this issue. You are correct. Yeah, there's no excuse. $1 billion company. There we go.
So yeah, it's like if the mum and pop hardware store on the corner can make a website that functions, it's all that crap. Surely GW could have, and it might be hard. It might be like take down everything, create an entirely new domain or something. I don't know. But like the website we got, oof. It's emblematic of the game systems themselves. Like I say, it's 3 different, completely different approaches for the core game systems, which is neglect. It's almost like the stage of grief. You've got neglect, you've got resigned to your fate in the case of Age of Sigmar, you've got just sure, why not bring out a new edition because this game's starting to suck in the case of 40k. It's different again with, say, Middle Earth, where Middle Earth just gets these new releases and people just sort of scratch their head and go, what was wrong with the last edition? There was nothing wrong with it.
Well,
so why are we getting a new edition? They're just confused every time.
Oh yeah, it's just
Middle Earth people. Yeah, they're a funny community, and I think a new edition comes out, like they're happy. They're like, oh, cool, a new edition. They're like, why is there a new edition?
I do suspect there is something to the competitive perception of 40k and a new edition that could probably be written off, I guess you could say, by the competitive player base or the general player base around the idea of a I don't support this attitude, but a lot of people in 40k seem to be, let's say, overly enthused by the meta and how it can shift and how interesting it is for their gaming system, right? And I think hitting the reset switch on a new edition, all the books have come out, we've gone through the motions. The most interesting thing we can do now is to change the meta again to keep our competitive space interesting and dynamic. And I say this in air quotes because I hate it, right? Because that is not a selling point for like Horus Heresy players, right? Or thematic players, where it's like, hey, the game just finished, guys. Can we play it? Can we play the game now that it's finished and everything's out? It's no longer in beta or in alpha or pre-alpha, right? And it's just like, oh god.
Yeah. It's.
Yeah, sorry. That's just me being a downer. A downer.
No, it is a downer though, because let's face it, the Warhammer community and the type of people it typically has attracted. Again, I'm not trying to insult people here, but I would say it's more people. Well, let's just say, not everyone is on the spectrum in Warhammer, but there's probably more people on the spectrum in Warhammer than in other hobbies.
I would agree. Yes.
And
yes,
the people who it attracts tend to, instead of treating it like a hobby, where it's like a thing I do to enjoy every now and then, but it's not the heart and soul of my existence, it becomes a part of their core personality. They'll get tattoos, they'll get bed sheets, everything they have at home is Warhammer themed.
Bed sheets.
All they talk about.
Sorry, I just fucking followed it with that.
It's a real thing, and they get so enamored of it, they are immune to seeing the flaws. And where I feel that I exist I see my role as consumer advocacy, trying to explain what the faults are, explain what I love where I can. Like my Getting Started in Heresy series is still my favorite series to make. Explaining what I love, but also explaining what isn't working, because I want things to be better, because that encourages more people to stay and be retained in the game system.
I
Right?
align with all of that. It's
I think it's pretty rational goals, although I guess I've sold it badly because it's not what people think when they think of me. Um,
no,
but
so go ahead.
but yeah, but other people, those who become too enamored of it, their personality becomes intertwined, and so a perception of it being less than perfect is a perception of them being less than perfect.
Yeah, I
And
think
they can't
that's what it is
dissociate.
more than your. It's not
And
an inability of yours that you're not portraying yourself correctly. I think it's purely people being emotionally attached to their pastime, to their hobby, right?
it's a very toxic relationship to have, because the big company is not going to come in. You know, I get really, really upset on behalf of people. You know, um, they will do silly things like neglect paying important bills because they're too busy buying Warhammer.
Oh,
Ah, I have to support the local store with the new. No,
oh,
you
yeah.
don't. Like, you are doing yourself a disservice. You have real responsibilities, but they are using the escapism, the dopamine drive of purchasing these things to, to fill a void that exists in their life. Unfortunately, whether it's a real or perceived void. And I do use those terms very deliberately. There are people who, I know it's probably getting a bit deep and meaningful, but people who have perceived, like, nobody likes me, but actually a lot of people do like them. It's just they've psychologically convinced themselves, deluded themselves into thinking they're unloved, they don't have friends, and unfortunately there is an endpoint to that which is not pleasant. And there are people who legitimately are lonely, and again, I will say, more tied into people who are probably closer to that spectrum. Again, I've seen enough of it over 3 decades in this hobby that I'm happy to say the stereotypes exist for a fucking reason, right? There are plenty of unwashed, fat, slovenly people out there who
Yeah.
will drive other people away, just physically repulsive, right? Even if you want to be polite and nice to them, think maybe they're, have redeeming qualities. Sometimes people don't. It sucks, right? But it's true. You can't just pretend that these things don't exist in the community, right? It's like everything in life. There are just some harsh truths you cannot hide from, you cannot run away from. And in the Warhammer community, you have a disproportionate number of these people. So when Games Workshop does release a new edition of the game, right, and this is to bring it full circle, if they are going to derive some form of happiness, pleasure, immediate gratification from that release, that's your market.
I mean, I think it's very, very likely that such people as you've described would be, well, that's what they're longing for, right? There's like a culture of wanting to be excited, and I think I mentioned this to you earlier. Like, you identify as a Warhammer guy, and so you want to be excited for Warhammer things because you've wrapped up your identity in this activity, right?
Well, I call it the toxic positivity crowd.
They are guilty of it, but I think you can be toxically positive without having that depend. Oh, maybe not. Yeah, I agree with your
Food
point,
for
though,
thought.
regardless.
Yeah, so I acknowledge these problems exist, and like a huge part of my advocacy is trying to help these people help themselves. One of my biggest rules is leave it a week or two. You see something, you're really keen on it, sure, put it in your shopping cart on the website, but why don't you just take a few steps back, wait a week or two on it, and then come back to it and see if you've still got 100% of that same hype you had for it when you first put it in the cart. I often find that impulse goes away. Like, just
Oh,
saying.
well, yeah, I mean, it's. whenever a cool new character comes out for a faction, it happened with the Lion, right? There's a whole bunch of people wanting I'll just buy just to paint, right? There's like a lot of that in like my local play group where it's like a lot of people just getting into it because it's exciting. It's exciting Warhammer release, right? From that, I'm making it sound worse than it is, but like, yeah, I can appreciate the enthusiasm that comes with like a tent pole or like a big character release that's been in the lore in the background, whatever, right? I wonder how. Well, go ahead.
Oh, it's very hard, obviously, to if a character comes out and it's a bit, you know, it's very hard because I'm often critical of that stuff. I'm enough removed now from the hype that I can just call as I see it, right? And then people just say, "Oh, you're just hating for the sake of hating." It's like, well, no, I'm just calling how I'm seeing it.
What I'm describing
say,
is generally with newer people, anyways.
Right. But you'll get models where it's like, this is kind of subpar. This model, like, here's my list of reasons why, right? So it could be something like the new Gazkul. I'll go, I think the new Gazkul model is too symmetrical. His armor doesn't look cobbled together and like mismatched plates and stuff like the old Gazkul did. It feels like it's a little bit too pure, too clean, like almost like it was built by a human. Like the human sculptor, perhaps, you know, or any of those new like Snakebites vehicles, like Orc vehicles should be made of scraps. Every plate, you know, on old vehicles was a piece of plasticard. So no two plates were the same. You know, some had octagonal or hexagonal nuts on them, some had round rivet domes, some were welded. Every plate was different on the vehicle, and if you put the left side picture of the vehicle and the right side beside each other, it could look like two completely different vehicles, but the new stuff's not like that. And I'll point that out to people and they're, you just hate it. So, am I wrong? Am I wrong?
No.
You know? So you get a lot of that with the newer sculpts especially, where it's like some of them nail it and some of them don't, but it's like people never want to say when one doesn't. About the closest you can come from the general community is probably Wallace and Gromit, and the pants. The if anyone knows that wonderful TV show, when they released the Inquisitor Codius recently. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
You know immediately what I mean when I bring that model up, and you know it's bad, and yet how many people were, you know, out there on social media, oh my god, I have to have this model. Really?
Yeah, that one I couldn't understand. The other one,
You
yeah,
know?
that's an egregious example. Well, I think it does root back to this idea, like you've identified yourself as a Warhammer guy, so you want to you want to be able to talk to the people who you want to be able to talk about how exciting Warhammer is because you're into it, right? I think there's a lot of that in the background of what's driving that behavior, right? That you're kind of speaking to there. And I also wonder, because I feel like it's maybe disproportional in Warhammer, perhaps. And I wonder if it's because, well, my perception anyways, but I wonder if that is the case. I wonder if it's because this hobby in particular asks you to invest more creatively, right? Than just playing video games, for example, right? Or playing, you know, pickup hockey or whatever, right?
That in and of itself is probably an entire research topic for an enterprising university
because
student.
like there's definitely something to people's investment with their factions, like you mentioned earlier, getting tattoos and things like that. And I think that's part of it, right? Like you invest into your legion or your chapter or whatever, and it's like, man, I just love the Night Lords, they're my shit, and then you get a Night Lords tattoo, right? Because now it's like you're so invested into it, you spend thousands of hours painting and thousands of dollars buying and realizing your army, right?
You see,
I think how could you not get invested?
I think it's the fact that the community has always shut down criticism. It's just a faux pas topic. people will still come on my videos. So you just do this because rage sells. It's like, no, I can literally prove to you the finances that says no, rage does not sell.
No, it doesn't. Toxic positivity sells.
Toxic positivity by far. The proof is in the channel size.
Yeah.
Right. I sit there around, I think probably around 27,000 subs, with no, I will mention, with no desire to really go up. I don't care. I make the content. I don't even ask, like, subscribe, click the bell icon. I don't do any of that. Right. I could not care less. Go over though and look on Chapter Master Valrak's channel. Right.
Yeah.
Just be more likable person in general, but also look at the typical content that's coming out there. It's wow, oh my god, how amazing new miniature, right?
Yeah,
so,
the hug box
demonstrable, right?
I think so. I think so. There could be other factors as well, but I think more often than not, the toxic positivity is more attractive than negativity. But that's not even to say you're toxically negative. It's just fair criticism, right? That's just how people perceive
not even
criticism.
about me. Like, criticism in general of this hobby. Like, if you go to a movie, right? Obviously, you're going to have your bought and paid for movie reviewers. You're going to have your bought and paid for car reviewers, right? It always happens, right?
Why would you not?
Everyone knows you're playing the game to keep your access, right? And when the contracts get leaked, they say as much. And Games Workshop's contracts have been leaked and say as much with their influences. But if a person was to say that a movie was crap, that would be perfectly normal. If a person was to leave a 1-star review for a hotel they stayed in, put on the black light and the room lit up like a Christmas tree. There were cockroaches moving. What's worse was there was a pile of what looked like clothes. It was also moving. Like, 1 star for this hotel. And people are not going to get on there and go, you're just a hater, man. You're just doing this for the clicks, right? It's perfectly acceptable behavior. You go to a restaurant and you're like, yeah, look, came down with food poisoning and, I've been throwing up for like 2 days and I've been bedridden and I literally just want to end it. I just feel like death incarnate right now. People don't come at you and be like, yeah, well, just because you don't enjoy the food poisoning doesn't mean others, aren't allowed to enjoy the food poisoning. The Warhammer hobby is completely removed from these normal critical processes. It's just the company made something and it's artistic and therefore you don't have a right to critique art.
That's so stupid.
That's...
Yeah, that's incongruent. I cannot accept. I refuse.
Like, so it's like, someone like, who cares? It's a new Gascon model. Why can't you just be happy it's a new Gascon model? It's like, maybe I don't like it.
Yeah.
There is no law that says I must like new releases for the sheer fact they've been released. Like, if the company was giving me free miniatures, like they just said, hey, you play our games, you step into our store, like, here's, you want a new Spartan for your Horus Heresy army? Here you go, here's a $200 Spartan tank. It's like, oh, okay, well, I'm not going to complain about this. This is free. This is nice, okay? But I'm paying for the vehicle. Mm-hmm. I'm paying for something. I'm allowed to say whether or not I like it. This is the bit that people, I think, get caught up on.
Yeah. And well, also, like, what does it do to the... I would like to see the numbers of people who have paid early access for review and are actually critical of it.
I'd like to see the numbers for the people who get given free stuff and then never touch it again. In fact, I might go hunting around on YouTube.
You might be
because
like 100%.
I know how many of the quote-unquote influencers, got like Horus Heresy kits for 2.0. Obviously, I didn't. And people go, oh, you're just upset you didn't get a kit. I'm like, nah, not really, because I didn't really like what was in the kit. Like, And if I buy one out of my own pocket, nobody's going to be like, well, you're bought and paid for review. That's what you bought it himself, right?
Exactly.
So I don't really care. But it's interesting to me when you see all these channels that never even, like, they don't even know how to say some of the names. They don't know how the system plays. And they'll be there like, oh, this is so cool, guys. Games Workshop sent me this. And you're like, mate, you don't even know who the fuck Horus is. Like, and then they do all their videos from it, they farm their clicks, and then they just cut it away. And it's like, the Horus Heresy sets on one of their shelves somewhere. Or in the case of some guys, they got other people to paint it for them. That happened. I don't know if people remember, some of the, at least one of the big influencers who went to Warhammer World had another person paint the miniatures for him. This is like, that's how much they cared.
This is too much to keep up with.
Yeah, and then I got annoyed at that, right? So how's this for funny? I got annoyed that a person was like, oh, there was just no time to do it. And I was like, well, fuck that. I bought the box, and then I challenged myself. Even though I work full-time, unlike said person who was just a YouTuber, and sorry, YouTubing is not a full-time profession. Not at that level. But like I worked full-time at the time. I was a production manager, so I was working crazy long hours, right? Running an entire factory, running company's production, actually.
Is this for your salamanders?
And I did the salamanders.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
right.
I did the entire Horus Heresy box set, converted the crap out of it. Like the dreadnoughts and all that, did all this freehand painting on the Spartan. I also did a whole nother squad of flamers, because Salamander's flamer squad, right?
Right on.
And did all of that, and did it under the 3-week deadline, and got the video recorded and put out. Just to be like, basically to say, like, look, I'm in full-time employment. This is just a side hobby for me. I did it to a higher standard, did it in my own time, and did my video and got it out in time. You're just lazy, and the company shouldn't be picking people like you to do their stuff. That's basically the point of it. And some of you are listening right now going, that's very petty, and they are correct. But, it's a pride thing. Like, I enjoyed this. I felt like there are so many great people in the Heresy community who should have got that box set. They would have been far better exemplars, but the company probably just thought they're a captured audience. We've already got them. They're already interested in Heresy. There is nothing to be gained from sending it to those amazing people. So they sent it to, the typical bunch of, oh my God, everything is amazing people out there who's, frankly, they always say everything's amazing, so their opinions are worthless, because I could probably encourage them to, get that food poisoning from the restaurant I mentioned earlier and eat the dodgy kebab and be sick for the next few days and turn around and say 10 out of 10, would do it again.
Yep, when everything is amazing, nothing's amazing.
When everything's amazing, nothing's amazing. When everyone has a tactical rock, nobody stands out from the crowd.
Valid. What do you say? Is that an appropriate endpoint, perhaps? We have been going on. We're coming up on
to end on a tactical rock, yeah.
End on a tactical rock. Awesome. All right. So, with regards to wrapping up, are we missing anything? Anything to mention?
Well, we are missing North, so
yeah, we should really check in on that guy.
Yeah, we know he's being smashed with work at the moment, so we're not holding a grudge against him.
Yeah, much. No, it's all good. It's all good. But I guess with that, Macca's link to Macca's channel, Outer Circle, is in the description. And with that, we'll catch you guys on the next one.
Take care.
Well, that's a wrap on this collaborative hobby chat. If you enjoyed this video, there are buttons for liking, sharing, and subscribing. And as always, a special thanks to Julius Maximus, as well as my other generous patrons and channel members. Patrons and channel members get early access to videos. Just a little something for those who help keep the dream alive. Anyways, thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.